Reporting from Arkham Asylum, this is Gotham Rogues. In this video we spotlight the underrated rogue Maxie Zeus. Well, we're finally back in good old Gotham City. We had a 2 weeks vacation, first visiting Central City and then a completely different universe, known as Marvel. As fun as it was, I've gotta say it's good to be home again. We've still got some severely neglected Gotham rogues to cover after all, and why not dive right into it and pay old Maximillian Zeus a visit. Maxie Zeus made his first appearance in Detective Comics 483, published in 1979. The issue was released on the 40th anniversary of the publication of Detective Comics number 27, which of course featured the first appearance of Batman. DC decided to celebrate this milestone, so they had writer Dennis O'Neil and artist Don Newton create a special tale called The Curse of Crime Alley, a sequel of sorts to O'Neil's earlier classic There's No Hope in Crime Alley. In the story, Batman is on his annual visit in Crime Alley, the place where his parents were gunned down years ago, and while there happens upon an evil plot orchestrated by a new eccentric mobster called Maxie Zeus. Maxie has had a falling out with a fellow gangster, John Logan, who's now hiding out in a massive apartment complex in Crime Alley. Zeus has ordered his men to pump poison gas into the building's ventilation system, which will either kill Logan or flush him out before a barrage of gunfire. Of course, the poison will kill everyone else in the building too, but Maxie doesn't care, and as always it's up to the grim Dark Knight to put a stop to it all. O'Neil and Newton brought their villain back in the very next issue of Detective for a story called Assault on Olympus. Insulted by the Batman's interference with his previous plans, Maxie has decided to kill the caped hero and sets in motion a devilish plot to lure him into a devious death trap. The first story didn't really touch upon Maxie's insanity and megalomania whatsoever, and frankly barely featured him. He was more of a behind-the-scenes villain. It's this one that fleshed the character out and introduced us to his god complex and fixation on Greek mythology. Here we learned that the crazy Maxie actually believes that he is Zeus reincarnated and demands to be treated as such. He's completely off his rocker, yet also a criminal genius, which is why so many goons join up with him, despite his eccentricities. Basically like with so many other rogues. It's also briefly mentioned that he used to be a college teacher in Greek history and mythology. Max continued to appear frequently in Batman stories in the following years, and we were eventually introduced to his young daughter, Medea, whom Maxie cares greatly for. In fact, his love for his daughter is probably the only thing that rivals his love for himself. In 1984, Zeus saw his final pre-crisis appearance in a two-parter published in Batman and the Outsiders. In it, Maxie has formed a team called the New Olympians, which consists of various superpowered rogues, each with a Greek god gimmick. With this legion of knaves under his command, Maxie disrupts the 1984 Olympic Games and holds all the people there hostage. Batman and his Outsiders arrive at the scene, and in exchange for the spectator's safe exit, the Dark Knight challenges Zeus to a series of Olympic contests between his team and Maxie's. The character's first appearance in the new post-crisis era came in Grant Morrison and Dave McKean's celebrated graphic novel Arkham Asylum: A Serious House on Serious Earth, released in 1989. Of course, this comic features a completely reimagined Zeus and isn't considered to be part of any proper canon, so I guess Maxie's first real post-crisis appearance was in Batman 470, published in 1991. Written by Alan Grant and penciled by Norm Breyfogle, the story was a tie-in to the big Wonder Woman event of that year, War of the Gods. In it, Maxie is unwittingly dragged into a grand conflict far beyond his understanding when the cheetah hires him to safekeep a sacred relic called the Themysciran Goblet. With this comic, Maxie Zeus began to be treated as less of a serious threat and more of a joke of a villain. He was beginning to be played up for laughs, and a couple of years later during the Nightfall arc, he famously ran right into a tree, knocking himself out while attempting to escape Arkham. I mention this even though it's just a tiny cameo, because it seems to be the character's most well-known appearance. I constantly see it brought up. I do find it funny, but at the same time kinda sad. It sure is tragic how low the character fell. Not even Killer Moth goofed up that badly. Just prior to this, Maxie got a new sidekick in the form of his main squeeze, Iris, who went mad and donned a colorful costume with wings, taking on the moniker of the Harpy. She looked out for Maxie's best interests while he was locked up in Arkham. The Harpy never appeared beyond the two-parter that introduced her, however, making her a prime candidate for a Forgotten Villains video, I guess. In later years, Maxie Zeus hasn't really appeared a whole lot. He showed up every now and then, usually always in some smaller role or even cameo. And perhaps his most notable appearances of the 21st century so far have been in the Wonder Woman arc Gods of Gotham, published in 2001, in which Maxie actually died, although because it's comics, he eventually returned. And of course, let's not forget Kevin Smith's Batman Cacophony miniseries from 2008. This wacky story had Maxie use a supply of Joker venom to create a designer drug called Chuckles, earning him tons of money. But of course, once the clown found out about it weren't such happy times anymore. As for other media, he showed up in a couple of cartoon shows. First, it was in Batman the Animated Series, where he was reimagined as a business tycoon who goes mad after suffering through a financial crisis and criminal charges pressed against him. Eventually, he gains a god complex, believing that he is Zeus. A decade later, he showed up on The Batman, again being depicted as a wealthy businessman, this time even running for mayor in Gotham. He loses the election due to his absurd policies, and then goes off as rocker, naturally. Maxie never appeared in any of the Arkham games, but he was referenced in a couple of them. You could collect his bio in Arkham Asylum. He did however appear in one of the earliest Batman games ever made, namely Batman for the NES, based on the 1989 movie. Yeah, that's right, this 8-bit pixelated mess is actually Maxie Zeus, or at least according to the manual it is. He was depicted as one of the many enemy types you had to fight. In fact, all of the enemies you fight in that game are actually minor Batman villains, like KG Beast, Deadshot, Nightslayer, and even the Flash villain Heatwave. The history of Maxie Zeus sure is a tragic one. He began as a very formidable foe, like Batman says in his second appearance. He's a combination of awesome intelligence and utter madness, a terrible threat. And then he went on to say, he's as dangerous as anyone I've ever faced, as dangerous as the Joker, as Ra's al Ghul. So what the hell happened? Why did old Max become a joke of a character? Well, these things just seems to happen, like it did with the Riddler in the 80s. But of course Eddie came out of his slump, while Maxie hasn't yet, and I doubt he ever will. He seems to have gained a very strong reputation as a lame D-list rogue, just like Calendar Man, although I'd argue that Maxie is even worse off. Also, just like with Calendar Man, I don't quite understand why this is. What is so goofy about a theatrical weirdo who thinks that he's the god Zeus reincarnated? But is it really goofier than a guy who's obsessed with riddles or Alice in Wonderland? How about a skinny geek who dresses up like a scarecrow? Depending on how you look at it, anything can be goofy. I just failed to see why exactly Maxie is more goofy than any of those other examples. I think the guy fits in perfectly with the rest of the Arkham crowd actually. He's a stir-crazy, arrogant, delusional, megalomaniacal villain with a gimmick. Sounds like I just described the entire Rogues Gallery. Now, I don't really think he should be an A-lister up there with the top guys. Of course not. But he could manage the same level as say rogues like Black Mask or Hugo Strange. I would love to see Maxie established as one of Gotham's big mob bosses, a ruthless gangster who just happens to be totally out of his mind. That's what he originally was in the late 70s and early 80s, and it worked. He was a fine villain back then, an eccentric mobster with a giant ego. It's Maxie's weird and over-the-top personality that makes him interesting and entertaining anyway. If he would have been just an ordinary crook, this video would never have been made. I absolutely love his overconfident arrogance. He never loses his cool, at least not the classic pre-crisis Maxie. The loser version is another matter. But anyway, even when defeated by Batman, Max barely cared, for it's beneath a god to let a mere mortal upset him. He often even found a way to look at it positively, like getting caught was somehow what he had wanted. Like in one story where Batman says, "In some ways you're the strangest foe I've ever had, certainly the most proud. Surely you realize that your pride has been your downfall." And then crazy old Max replies, "How happy I am to hear you admit that, for it's not pride the fault of the gods." So he basically just spun his defeat to his own favor. If he's so proud that it became his undoing, then that's just further evidence that he's an actual god. What a way to look at it. I think it's a real waste to not utilize such an entertaining and eccentric character. Portraying him as a lame loser is just lazy writing. It's such an easy thing to do. Relegate him to the status of Kite Man, Crazy Quilt, and those other dweebs. That's what you do when you, the writer, can't think of a proper way to use him. Yeah, just fall back on good old comfortable Mr. J instead. Is it me, or am I coming off as really passive-aggressive in this video? Another aspect of the classic Maxie that had potential was his daughter Medea, whatever. Not many Batrogues have kids, so you could have done something really interesting with that. But instead, his daughter was forgotten in the post-crisis continuity. So there you have it. That's the story of underrated rogue Maxie Zeus. I've always liked the guy. He's a very fun and entertaining villain, but you don't have to portray him as a loser for him to be that. He can be both fun and an actual threat. Let me know in the comments what you think about dear old Maxie, and as always, remember, Arkham Asylum awaits you in the next video.